Howdy, folks, and welcome to the podcast. I am Connor Jones, your host, and this is Untold Tales from this side of nowhere. I'm bringing you another story from just about as close as you can get to the middle of nowhere, that is Poverty Flats, Wyoming. And I am tickled pink to be with you guys today. Before we get started, I want to tell you about our sponsors. We are sponsored by Basins Market, located in Basin, Wyoming. Basins Market is your destination for groceries, fresh produce, and the best meat department in the Bighorn Basin. Come in and sample their wide selection of products Monday through Saturday from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and Sundays from noon to 6. We are also sponsored here by the Wyoming Welcome Program. The folks at the Wyoming Welcome Program are excited about their service called Table Talk. They place brochures on restaurant tables in Cody and Powell that are filled with fun facts about Wyoming, jokes, and the month's holidays. In addition to this information, they include advertisements from local businesses, so if you're interested in being included in a brochure and getting your business out there, please send them an email. They only have a couple spots left, so you can contact them at HaleyJ, that's HALEYJ, at WyomingWelcome.com. And now, the podcast. Well, the school year is indeed winding down here in Powell, Wyoming. The 8th graders go on a field trip every year at Powell Middle School, and they go on out to Heart Mountain to do some geological exploration, and they also go over to Shell Canyon and the Wyoming dinosaur tracks outside of Grable. If you've never been over to the dinosaur tracks, I highly recommend it. It's pretty neat. There are fossilized tracks from dinosaurs that have walked in mud a cajillion years ago, and they have been fossilized and preserved, so you can see those footprints. And then there are also belemnite fossils. Those are little squid tips from the bone in a squid's head. There's Gryphea, or devil's toenails. They look like little toenails. They're part of another aquatic crustacean. I think it's a crustacean. Maybe it's some kind of mollusk. Somebody's going to check me on this. I do know the name, though, and what they look like. But my favorite fossil over there is the crinoid. Those are tiny little vertebrae from an underwater prehistoric creature, and they get fossilized. But you can find them in ant hills over there if you just sift through the pebbles a little bit, and you can do it without disturbing the ants much. But you find these tiny little stars. They're probably, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch across, and really quite neat. So if you get a chance, big shout out to the Wyoming dinosaur tracks, the track site out there outside of Grable towards Shell. But yeah, the bus did not actually make it out to the track site this year because it's so muddy from the rainstorms we've been having, which I tell you is not normal in northwestern Wyoming, but we'll take it. Farmers love the rain. But with the mud and the difficulty of driving comes the need to get through mud. Some people live on dirt roads and that kind of thing. And when you are driving through some mud, you often gun the engine and hope for the best. And that kind of brings up today's topic, which is the importance of being fully committed. So here's our story. There are certain things in life that you have to be completely committed to if you want to be successful in their pursuit. For instance, playing the piano. If you're not committed enough to practicing consistently, then you'll never get past playing chopsticks or row, row, row your boat. Not that there's anything wrong with playing chopsticks or row, row, row your boat. They are great favorites of mine, and while they have never landed me on a stage in front of a hushed and awed audience, they are always tucked away in my back pocket in case I ever need to entertain at a dinner party. Since my wife informs me I am not dinner party material, I guess my chances of playing chopsticks for the general enjoyment of a group of friends are not high. Nevertheless, my point stands. Piano playing requires dedication, which I obviously do not have. Numerous other creative and athletic pursuits require commitment in order to be successful. Basketball, football, baseball, soccer, any major sport really, demands prolonged effort if you want to be any good at it. Even curling requires some practice, though my experience has been that those who are fully committed to that sport exhausted all other options and had to settle on something. My apologies to the curlers among us. Music, art, singing, dancing, all these things require commitment. When it comes to the outdoors, though, we encounter a body of sports and endeavors that require a completely different level of commitment. These are activities that require one to be fully committed, not only in order to be successful, but in order to survive, much like doing a backflip. This probably explains why I have found some degree of success in these pursuits, while my piano playing has not gotten much further past the two songs previously mentioned. I may come off as sounding a little extreme when I talk about success or certain death, but allow me to make my point. Let's take crossing a river during spring runoff, for instance. Each spring, when the ice and snow at higher elevations melts, this results in what the academic community refers to as the spring runoff. Those who have actually encountered the phenomenon have a different name that should not be repeated in polite society. During spring runoff, rivers swell into tsunamis of brown, frothy water, streams become rivers, and dry creek beds become anything but dry. It just so happens that as things warm up, so do outdoorsmen. Shed hunters come out in force, hikers hit the trails, and spring turkey season is in full swing. All of these activities often call for some sort of stream or river crossing, and you just can't cross a river half-heartedly, especially during the spring runoff. My buddy Marty Flincherton had a bad habit of attacking something with a burst of energy, then dropping off abruptly, much like the way he drove a stick shift. I still remember one spring when Marty, Fred, and I decided we would go camping the first weekend of summer vacation. School ended on a Friday, and we hit the trail within an hour of escaping the claustrophobic confines of the middle school walls. For reasons unfathomable to any of us, none of our parents allowed us to drive, which meant we had to hoof it out to the hills behind the ranch on Poverty Flats if we wanted to go camping. Having graduated from the backyard campouts of our childhood, we were now determined to venture further from home and set up camp in the red hills of the Elk Creek drainage south of Poverty Flats. Getting to the Elk Creek drainage, however, required us to cross Dorsey Creek. Under normal circumstances, Dorsey Creek was a mild-mannered little stream that liked to play nice and wind lazily through the hills, picking the occasional wildflower. With the warmer weather, however, Dorsey Creek had swelled into a crazed torrent of murky water that crashed around corners and tore large chunks of earth and cottonwood trees from its crumbling banks. At the point where we needed to cross Dorsey Creek, a concrete section of the road traversed a large metal culvert, and here we had expected to make the crossing with ease. Dorsey Creek had other ideas. When we arrived at the appointed place, we were met with the raw fury of the spring runoff, which had overwhelmed the culvert with debris and caused it to back up. This left Dorsey Creek no choice but to run up and over the road in its maddened efforts to get downstream, and left us unsure of the future of our outing. "Gee whiz," whistled Marty. "That's a lot of water." "Yeah," I agreed. "Old Dorsey Creek's all riled up today." "Well," Fred shrugged, "I guess we better go camping in the backyard instead." "Oh, nonsense," Marty grumbled. "We can still cross. The water's not that deep on the road." Fred and I contemplated the brown water streaking across the concrete portion of the road at slightly less than the speed of sound, then exchanged glances. "Well, I'm not going to cross it," I said. "That's too much water for me." "Ah, don't be a bunch of wimps," Marty taunted us. "Your feet will dry out pretty quick." "It's not my feet I'm worried about," Fred replied. At this point I huffed, "If it's not too deep, why don't you try it, Marty?" Marty opened and shut his mouth a few times like an angry goldfish, then readjusted his pack, his thumbs hooked through the shoulder straps. "Sure, why not?" he grunted. Then Marty demonstrated exactly why you have to be fully committed when you decide to cross a river. Things did start out all right, to be fair. He decided it would be best to get up a little speed for the crossing, and so backed up a few paces from the water's edge. With a look of determination gleaming in his eyes and his jaw set, he strode into the water. It only took him a few moments to realize his mistake. "Oh, bleep!" he shouted. "It's cold!" If Marty's mother had been present, perhaps her displeasure with his language would have persuaded him to keep going. But as it was, waist deep was about as far as Marty's resolve was going to carry him. The swollen creek took care of the rest. "Never mind," Marty called back to us, his arms thrown out for balance. "I think it's too deep. We better... Oh, bleep!" We never found out what Marty thought we better do, because as soon as he turned around to face the current, his increased profile gave the creek more area to push on. Combined with the weight of his pack pulling him backwards, the additional force of the swollen river knocked Marty over. "Marty!" I cried, watching as he was swept off the road and into the large pool of water on the other side. We looked on in awe as the creek, usually so docile and innocent, propelled Marty along like an arrow shot from a bow. "Oh, man!" Fred yelled. "Dad's gonna kill us!" "What do you mean?" I asked. "Dad has never been a huge Marty fan. Says he's a bad influence." "Yeah, but Marty had Dad's tent strapped to his pack." In the same strain as creek crossing, the great 50-mile hike also calls for total commitment. As a Boy Scout, few endeavors present more of a challenge, nor quite the thrill of a 50-miler, or simply the 50, as we like to call it in Troop 41. Not only a requirement for the hiking merit badge, but a rite of passage into manhood, the 50 involved hiking a continuous 50 miles in a minimum of 5 days, camping out each night of the trip. Given that our scoutmaster, Eli Lyman, was no great mathematician, our 50-milers were notorious for growing in length. On one notable trip, we ended up traversing no less than 76 miles of treacherous terrain in the Bighorn Mountains during a 6-day period, a feat each of Troop 41 will carry with them to their graves, in the form of chronic back and joint pain. When you begin a 50-miler, it is with enthusiasm, anticipation, and excitement. If you're lucky, your mother did not help pack your meals. "What do you mean you only need 2 packets of oatmeal for breakfast? Here, take some more trail mix. You boys are going to be hungry. Oh, and here's some canned peaches." A well-formulated 50-miler pack weighed approximately 25 pounds, so naturally each of us carried about 40. Given that my cousin Jim weighed approximately 80 pounds at age 13, his pack was equivalent to half his body weight. As Fred and I were stockier in build, our pack to body weight ratio was a little more favorable, but not by much. It was tradition that one of our mothers should drop us off at the start of the hike. Mom didn't want to miss out on the tradition, and so she usually accompanied us on the Monday morning when we started the hike from the West Ten Sleep Lake trailhead. Dad would man our 15-passenger van, dubbed the bus by us kids, and Mom would ride shotgun on the way up. Fred and I, along with a host of men and boys, filled the seats. At the drop-off point, we would all clamber out of the bus and collect our packs from Eli's pickup truck, which his wife would drive home. With grunts and labored breathing, we shouldered our packs and grouped up for the ritual before picture. In this picture, men and boys are well-fed, energetic, recently washed, at least most are recently washed, and smiling. 6 days later, when the mothers meet us at the endpoint at Shell Reservoir, the after picture will show something much different. More like photos taken of plane crash survivors who have spent a couple weeks in the Andes. What happens between the two photos is what requires total commitment. As soon as Mom snaps the photo and gets back in the van to drive away, the moment for indecision is past. Once she drives away on her way back home to double-check the payout on Dad's life insurance policy, you only have one choice. You have to finish the hike. There's no going back to the truck for an easy way out. All 50 miles have to be hiked, and you have only your own 2 spindly legs and the will to finish to count on. I've never known a Boy Scout to question his resolve, at least not vocally, on the first morning, but that all changes by Wednesday. Usually that's when the blisters are really starting to build up, and the sleep deprivation brought on by sharing a tent with a couple raunchy boys takes its toll. Even if the stench in the tent weren't enough to make your eyes water, it's impossible to sleep while tossing and turning on top of the large rock that invariably finds its way beneath your sleeping bag. In spite of all this, you have to be fully committed. There's no turning back on that Wednesday. Eli liked to lift our spirits on Wednesday with some words of encouragement. I'll never forget when Marty fell into a creek on a wet, rainy day and soaked his pack and all his clothes clear through. I could see in his eyes that he was ready to be done. He was tired, he was hungry, and now he was soaking wet and chilled to the bone. Eli grabbed him by the pack and yanked him out of the water, then growled, "I'll give you 10 seconds to feel sorry for yourself, and then we gotta keep on going. If you die here, we'll send your mother the GPS coordinates so she can come back for you." The rest of us boys couldn't help but crack a smile at Eli's humor. He always did his best to lighten the mood when things got tough. None of us actually believed our mothers would come clear out here to collect our remains if we didn't make it. In spite of this, Eli's words did tend to have a motivating effect, though. Every boy who ever embarked on a 50-miler in Troop 41 completed the hike under the power of his own 2 legs, and many a boy became a man during those hikes. Though I have never done so myself, I have learned from the experience of others that landing a bush plane also falls into the category of outdoor endeavors that require total commitment. My Grandpa Hildreth once told me how his older brother Pat owned a small Piper Cub plane and would occasionally take him along on flights around western Montana. During these flights, Pat instructed his brother, my grandpa, on the finer points of flying. Pull on the stick to go up and push to go down. Turn her right and left by pushing the stick the direction you want to go. See? Nothing to it. I'm pretty sure a similar conversation took place between a pair of technicians before the Chernobyl disaster, though in Russian rather than English. Before long, Grandpa could confidently pilot the plane while it sped along at cruising altitudes, and he was really starting to get comfortable with his role as pilot. Then came the day when the two brothers were flying into Dillon, Montana. Pat had handed the controls over to Grandpa once they reached cruising altitude, and Grandpa confidently guided the little aircraft towards their destination. Now as they neared Dillon, Pat said, "Why don't you go ahead and land her, Barton?" Grandpa hadn't expected this. Not wanting to disappoint his older brother, though, he nodded and white-knuckled the stick. As the runway loomed larger, so did Grandpa's anxiety. He had never attempted to land the plane before, and the idea of doing so was quickly becoming undesirable. Moments before they began their descent, Grandpa decided today wasn't the day he was going to land a plane. Bad decision. "Pat, you take over," he shouted, letting go of the stick. Pat, who was not prepared for this development, didn't get control of the stick until the ground was rushing up to greet them. Lucky for the two farm boys, Grandpa had lined things up right so that the little cub landed wheels first on the tarmac, but at a far higher clip than was ideal. With a jolt, the cub crashed down and bounced back up into the air, the nose of the plane dipping down as the tail rose several feet. Grandpa recalls that the plane pitched forward far enough that for a few terrifying moments he could see the ground through the window in the roof of the cockpit above him. Just when it seemed Grandpa's first landing would also be his last, the cub's tail fell mercifully back down to earth, and the plane rolled to a shuddering stop. For a moment or two, the two sat in stunned silence, the pounding of their hearts nearly audible in the confines of the cub's cockpit. "I thought you were going to land her, Barton," Pat finally said. "I thought so too, until I didn't," Grandpa replied weakly. The two clambered shakily from the cockpit and inspected the little plane. When the nose had dropped, the propeller had made contact with the runway, a fact made evident by the bent ends of the aluminum blades. Black marks on the wheel covers bore witness to just how much the tires had compressed when the plane crashed down. Grandpa reports that Pat calmly surveyed the damage, grabbed an adjustable wrench from the cockpit, and straightened out the bent propeller. He motioned for Grandpa to get back in the plane, then gave the prop a good twist and climbed in too. Pat then taxied down the runway and took off again. He didn't say another word about the incident, but he never did ask Barton to land again. "When you go to land a plane, you kinda have to go into it fully committed," Grandpa told me. "I'll say," I grunted. Grandpa nodded slowly. "Yep, we got off lucky that time. I always wanted to get my own plane, but never did," he mused. "Well, you probably had enough brushes with death that you didn't need one more," I suggested. "True," Grandpa agreed. "Now, if I just gun the engine hard enough, I bet we can make it through this creek. I know the spring runoff is started, but that water doesn't look too deep." I peered over the dash of the old Dodge pickup truck at the frothy torrent of murky water crashing over the rocks in front of us. A cottonwood tree drifted past, followed by some large chunks of earth that had been dislodged from the riverbank. "You know what, Grandpa? I think I'll just get out of the cab and you can show me how it's done." There you have it. Another untold tale from this side of nowhere. Yeah, full commitment. It's important. I was just thinking of other things you could add to this list. Skydiving. I don't know. Eating a jawbreaker the size of a pool ball. I don't know if I've talked about that one before, but yeah, that was an experience that required total commitment. Yeah, and several other things. Marriage. If you can think of any other outdoor endeavors that require total commitment, go ahead and tell me about it. I'm always happy to hear your comments. I did also want to mention we have started an account on Patreon where you can go and become a member to support our podcast and convince my wife that I should continue podcasting. Patreon is a platform for artists, writers, and content creators where you can pay a subscription to become a member. I think it's $5 a month, and it will help us out in defraying the cost of podcasting and allow myself to continue to make these stories, which I'm sure you find hilarious, or at least get a good chuckle out of. So if you are interested, you can mosey on over to patreon.com and look for us. There's also a link on our Facebook page, and we'd love to count on your support. In addition to supporting the podcast, we will also send you your very own Untold Tales from This Side of Nowhere Possibles kit. It includes matches, paper, fishing line and a hook, Band-Aids, and your very own tiny stub of a pencil that all fits in a cute little tin that will come in handy should you ever end up in a plane crash in the Andes and need to start a fire, So come find us on Patreon. As always, this has been another Untold Tale from This Side of Nowhere, where we work twice as hard for half as much and still find time for the important things, like fishing. See you next time, folks.